The alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., but Naomi Carter had already been awake for 20 minutes. She lay still in the dark apartment, staring at the ceiling while the city outside slowly came alive. Taxi horns, a barking dog, someone arguing 2 floors below. Another Thursday, another exhausting day. At 36 years old, Naomi had become an expert at surviving without feeling alive. She worked at a medical billing office downtown, spent 12 hours a day solving other people's problems, and came home too tired to deal with her own. The hardest part wasn't even the exhaustion, it was the silence. 3 years earlier, her husband had walked out after admitting he'd been seeing someone else. 2 months after that, her mother passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. Since then, Naomi's world had become smaller and quieter. She stopped answering friends' calls, stopped going to church, stopped singing, stopped praying, not because she hated God, she just didn't know what to say to him anymore. That morning, she dragged herself out of bed and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back looked older than 36. Her eyes were tired, heavy. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, but even she didn't believe it anymore. By lunchtime, the office's air felt suffocating. Phones rang non-stop. Her supervisor kept pushing deadlines. A customer screamed at Naomi over a mistake she didn't even make. When the call finally ended, Naomi muted her headset and covered her face with her hands. "Hayes," said a soft voice beside her. It was Miriam Daniels, one of the older women from accounting. "You're okay?" Naomi forced a smile. "I'm fine." Miriam gave her the kind of look that said she knew that was a lie. Before walking away, Miriam placed a small folded note beside Naomi's keyboard. "Read it later," she said gently. Naomi barely looked at it for the next few hours, but near the end of her shift, after another stressful meeting, she unfolded the paper absent-mindedly. Written in neat blue ink were the words, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart." Underneath it was written, Psalm 95. Naomi stared at the note. Something about it unsettled her, not in a bad way, in an honest way. That evening, rain poured across the city streets as Naomi waited at the bus stop. Cold wind whipped through her coat. Her bus was late. Again. Annoyed, she opened the Bible app on her phone for the first time in months. She searched for Psalm 95. At first, she only planned to skim it. But then she read, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation." Naomi almost laughed bitterly. Joy? She couldn't even remember what joy felt like. Still, she kept reading. "In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him." The rain softened around her as the words settled deeper than she expected. Then she reached the verse from the note. "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." Naomi froze, because, if she was honest, her heart had become hard. Not cruel, just guarded, numb. She had spent years protecting herself from disappointment, pain, grief, and even hope. Especially hope. Tears slowly formed in her eyes as buses splashed through puddles nearby. For the first time in a long time, Naomi whispered a prayer. "God, I don't even know how to come back to you." The wind blew softly across her face. No thunder, no dramatic sign from heaven. But deep inside her chest, something shifted. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. The next Sunday morning, Naomi stood outside her old church building. She almost turned around 3 times. Cars filled the parking lot while people laughed and greeted each other at the entrance. She felt out of place immediately, like someone returning to a home they no longer belonged in. But before she could leave, the front doors opened. And there stood Miriam. She smiled warmly, like she'd been expecting her. "I saved you a seat." Naomi blinked. "How did you know I'd come?" Miriam shrugged gently. "I didn't. I just hoped." During worship, Naomi stood stiffly with her arms folded while everyone else sang. The music sounded unfamiliar, until suddenly they began singing about God being faithful even in the wilderness. And something broke inside her. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Not polite tears, the kind you've held back for years. Naomi covered her mouth, embarrassed, but Miriam simply held her hand. No judgment, no pressure, just presence. For the first time since her mother died, Naomi allowed herself to grieve fully. Not only the death, but the loneliness, the betrayal, the disappointment, the exhaustion, all of it. And somehow, in the middle of all those tears, she felt God near again. Not condemning her, not angry, waiting. Weeks passed. Then months. Naomi's life didn't magically become perfect. Her bills still existed. Her job was still stressful. Some days were still heavy, but her heart was changing. Every morning before work, she started reading one psalm with coffee at her kitchen table. Sometimes she prayed for 5 minutes. Sometimes she just sat quietly, but slowly the numbness faded. One Saturday afternoon, Naomi found herself walking through a local park, smiling at absolutely nothing. The realization surprised her. She had forgotten she could feel light again. An older man nearby played saxophone while children chased pigeons across the pavement. Sunlight filtered through the trees. And for the first time in years, Naomi didn't feel abandoned by life. She felt held. A few months later, a young woman named Tasha Reed started working at Naomi's office. Tasha reminded Naomi of herself from years ago, overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted. One afternoon, Naomi noticed her crying alone in the break room. "Hey," Naomi said softly, sitting beside her. "You're okay?" Tasha laughed weakly. "Honestly, no." Naomi nodded slowly. "I understand." For nearly an hour they talked. About pressure, pain, disappointment, fear. Before leaving, Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded note. She handed it to Tasha, the same way Miriam once handed one to her. Tasha opened it and read quietly. "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart." Psalm 95, Naomi said gently. "That chapter found me when I was falling apart." Tasha looked down at the paper carefully, as if holding something fragile. "Do you really think God still speaks to people like us?" Naomi smiled through soft eyes. "I think he never stopped." That night, Naomi sat by her apartment window watching. The city lights flicker beneath. The dark sky. Life still wasn't easy, but she no longer carried the same emptiness. Because Psalm 95 had reminded her of something she almost forgot. God wasn't asking her to pretend she was strong. He was asking her not to close her heart. And somewhere between the grief, the waiting, and the worship, grace found her again.